Seen each other.
For sure.
Yeah.
Very good yourself.
I've heard you coming up to the Chandler stand.
Daniel's trying. Don't get me in there eventually.
Because it was nice this afternoon, and then I realized it was really cool.
He's a musical guy. He was like one of the. What do you play?
Piano.
Piano.
And I sing as well. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, you do vocals. It's good.
Yep.
Yeah.
So.
I was a tuba player, so
Okay.
back in my instrument.
Very
instrumental
nice.
days.
Yeah.
So
That's fun, dude.
I think about playing again too, but I look around to buy a used one. They're only $3,000.
Yeah. Any sort of brass instrument like that, it's
Yeah.
going to cost a lot of money.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
That's good. Why don't we begin with our prayer? Blessed is our God, always now and forever, into the ages of ages. Amen. Christ, the true light, enlightens and sanctifies every person coming into the world. Let the light of your countenance shine upon us, that we may see your unapproachable light, and guide our steps in the way of your commandments, through the intercessions of your all-holy Mother, and of Saint Nicephorus the leper, and of all the saints, for your holy, always now and forever, to the ages of ages. Amen. Welcome, early. So tonight we'll be doing a paráclesis to Saint Nicephorus at 7 o'clock. So. What's that? Kathleen?
Would you like me to do like New Jersey?
Sure.
How you doing?
How you doing?
The right response is New Jersey and New York. It's how you doing, and the right response is I'm doing. You doing?
I'm
So
doing.
how you doing?
How you doing? You doing?
I'm doing.
All right. I like that.
We mock each other. I mean, those of us who had ever mock each other out. People out here think, oh my God, you two are fighting. It's, no, we are having fun. This is how we are.
You're saying hello.
Yes, exactly.
Hey Zach, how are you? Welcome, good to be with, have you here. So yeah, tonight we're going to continue with our book, The Mountain of Silence. Hopefully we'll get through chapters 7 and chapter 8. Chapter 7 is Signs and Wonders, and chapter 8, I think it's called Angels and Demons, if I remember correctly. Yes, Angels and Demons. So in this chapter 7, we hear a lot about stories from Elder Pacious, who was the spiritual father of Father Maximus, and you kind of enter into the life of the elders and the saints, how they think, their humility, their great power that God gave to them, but that they downplay that. They're more focused on the repentance and their prayer connection with God. So it's kind of neat to enter into that, and so we'll definitely talk about the lives of some of these saints. I meant to bring with me a stack of some books because I'd like to give you an idea of what kinds of lives of saints are out there. There's many wonderful books, and if you check out our library next door, we have a whole section of lives of the saints. I think last week we talked a little bit about Father Arsini. There's the life of Saint Pacious in our library. I'm not sure if it's taken out right now. We have several copies of that. It's like a thick green book. I think it's like a green cover. It's got a picture of Elder Pacious in the front. There's a book, Wounded by Love, which is the life and teachings of Saint Peteios. But these are the modern saints. There's also saints that go back to the very beginning. The life of Saint John Chrysostom, the Apostolic Fathers. I think today is Saint Ignatius of Antioch, was the saint we commemorated today. So he's got a beautiful life as well. So it's always good to read the lives of the saints along with the Holy Scriptures to give us an idea of not just the knowledge of the faith, but the phronima, the mindset of the faith. We're bringing a lot of people into the church over the next several months, and it's one of the conversations we're having of not just reading and learning about Orthodoxy, but trying to adopt the phronima and mindset of the church. And the best way to do that is to be around holy people, pious people, but obviously the standard is the saints. And if we're not around a lot of saints, like these kinds of saints, we read about them to try to learn about their spirit. So
Is that Ephronima?
a phronima is like,
Ephronima.
in English it'd be like Phronema, like phronima. So it's like the mindset, the life, like entering into the mind of that person, how they think, and we are conditioned how to think by our culture and our upbringing. So sometimes it works against our ability to grow in Christ. So we want to adjust the way we think. A very basic way that we think, we might be critical. And it's good to be a critical thinker, right? To be a problem solver. But sometimes in the spiritual life, it's not healthy to be overly critical. It's good to see the positive elements in another person, not just criticize their negative elements. To see the positive thoughts are very important when you read the lives of the saints. And, basically it's treating other people the way we hope God is treating us, right? And, hopefully God doesn't just focus on our negative qualities, because that's not going to go too well with us. It's like God can overlook a lot of our negative things and hopefully see us, our little effort that we're making, our attempt to do better. And that's how we should look at people too. Maybe they're not perfect, they're a work in progress, but if they're making a little effort, you use that to say, let me cultivate a little love for that person, because they're trying their best, trying to have that phronima, that mindset.
So phronima is the mindset of God?
Well, it's the mindset that we cultivate in our lives, our mindset. We're trying to have a holy mindset, have the mind of Christ, basically. Christ was so humble-minded, we take it for granted how humble our Lord is. And, reading the scriptures helps you to understand that mind. And then reading the lives of the saints, you see how the scriptures wants us to be. It's like the scriptures actualized, right? So, yes, Richie.
I was going to say, St. Paul uses that word in Romans chapter 8, compared it from having a carnal phronima, or a carnal mind, compared to the mind, or the phronima, the mindset of the spirit.
Yes, and in the Greek, it is phronima, right? Because it can be translated as mind. The ania, right, could be mind, which is more of the intellectual mind, I believe, or the power of the mind. Whereas phronima is like the adopting something, living like that. So, So, very good. I remember, have any of you heard of the Saint John of Kronstadt? He's a modern Russian saint. He passed away right before the Revolution, the early 1900s. And there's a book called The Prodigal Saint, The Life of Saint John of Kronstadt, and it's written from an academic. So it's not like an ideographic writing. It's more of a scholarly writing on the life of the saint. And I like it because the author compiled a lot of his own personal journal entries, and you're seeing his spiritual growth from a young saint to a more seasoned saint. And you see his writings going from the beginning, he's really hard on himself. For example, there's a journal entry where someone came to his house asking for alms, and he gave him something. But then he was like, "Hello, Nicoletta." And then he was upset at himself for not giving more. So you see this internal struggle, like, why did I give him so little? And you can put that right there on the table. Which saint is that? Oh, beautiful. You can have it sitting up, you can lean it against the mirror. Yep.
Where's that from?
That's from Holy Protection. We've ordered a bunch of icons, and they're slowly making them for our church. It's good to have a lot of crying babies in the church, right? There's life.
It's the future of the church.
It is, yeah. Yeah, so it's neat to read these lives of the saints and these journal entries, because I had those struggles. I drove by a guy, and he was asking for something, and it was like the worst thing ever. I reached into that compartment in the middle of my car. I was like, I hope I have some cash in here. And there was an envelope, and there was $20 in the envelope. And I pulled out 10 and gave it to him. I was like, why did I do that? I pulled away. I was like, it was obviously that it was supposed to be for the guy. And, so we were always second guessing ourselves. That struggle is part of the growth, right? So it's, so that's why I love some of these lives of the saints, especially the ones that are more, some of the ideography, they show just the holy miracles that the saints do. I like the ones that show the struggle of the saints, because that's something I can identify with. It inspires me. Say, hey, if they were struggling, I'm struggling too, so I can relate to that. But I can't relate to the great miracles. But nonetheless, the miracles are inspiring too. So we're going to learn about some of these miracles today. So, because if the miracles aren't happening, then you question yourself. The miracles that happened in the book of Acts, why aren't they happening in the church today, right? So like, why is it that there's a disconnect from the early church? And we see in the Orthodox Church, in the lives of the saints, there's no disconnect. Those miracles continue throughout the last 2,000 years, which that's inspiring too. So Father Maximus is speaking with the people around him, Kyriakos Markides, this man Stephanos, and then he talks a little bit about Saint Pacious here. And it says here that Father Maximus urged his disciples that in addition to studying the sacred texts and systematic practicing of the prayer, the Jesus prayer, reading the lives of venerated saints is essential for the spiritual life. So this is a good path for growing in our faith. Systematic prayer life, a prayer rule that we maintain, practicing the Jesus prayer, reading the Holy Scriptures, and reading the lives of the saints is a good foundation of setting us up for the spiritual life. And then talking about Saint Pacious, this is on page 80 for those of you who have a book. So the inquirers here are asking Father Maximus to share some stories about the elders and the saints. And he's talking about Saint Pacious. He says, when he realized that I wished to hear more details about the story he'd only briefly mentioned to me several years back, Father Maximus went on. As I mentioned earlier, Elder Pacious hardly ever slept, and that is not an exaggeration. I really don't think he slept for more than 1 or 2 hours a day. He spent all of his time praying. He followed to the letter of the program of daily services and prayers as practiced by all other monks living in monasteries. In addition, he kept vigil every night from sunset to sunrise, praying continuously for others and the world. I became a witness to his ceaseless prayer every time I was in his company. He prayed an hour for each different category of people, such as orphans, widows, refugees, the sick, those who are about to have an accident, soldiers at war, and others in need. So this was like a neat thing about the life of Saint Pacious that I heard, I think it was Father Nick Pallas who knew Saint Pacious, Father Theodosi's dad, who said that Saint Pacious would stay up most of the night and he'd pray for an hour in these like little categories. So as Father Maximus said, like 1 hour devoted to orphans, another hour devoted to widows, another hour devoted to refugees and the sick, which is pretty remarkable when you think about it, because, okay, if we just decided to do that once in our life, that'd be quite a feat, but to do that continuously every day, like over and over again, it is pretty remarkable. It shows like the strength of their spirit and the largeness of their hearts to have that motivation to keep doing that, and to maybe they saw the fruit of their prayer. But I would think it'd be difficult to pray for these categories of people, not to see the fruit of the prayer, and yet to be motivated to keep doing that, right? That shows you just how much love these saints have in their heart for other people. And then he went on to say that, just to give you an example of how important prayer was for him, Father Maximus went on to say, during the Gulf War, so this is the early 90s, he shut himself in a cell, cutting off all contact with visitors. That went on during the entire duration of the war. In fact, he intensified his prayers so that the war, as he told me later, would not get out of control and become even more destructive. So isn't that pretty amazing? And to think about what's happening today with Ukraine and Russia, and, you know, the temptation is to just like read the news and see what's happening. But to the saints, they weren't reading the news, but they were actively praying. And as Markides says here, he asks the question, did he really believe that his prayers made a difference, that they truly affected the war and the Gulf? And, Father Maximus said, of course, why would he do it if it didn't affect it? And, it's like, we say it, we're doing prayers, and we're not doing it to waste our time. We're doing it because no prayer goes unwasted. And yet if we truly believed that, wouldn't we be spending more time in prayer? So we believe it, but if we really, really believed it, we'd be praying more as well. So, but the saints, that they see the fruit of that prayer, and that's why they're motivated to keep doing it. So,
Father, when praying for others, I've I think I've heard this multiple times, but oftentimes it can't even just be as simple but still profound as praying Jesus' prayer for them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, that's correct. Yep. And you know, the degree to which we put into that prayer, it's gonna be felt more by that person. So if we just casually say a Jesus prayer for them, yeah, that prayer doesn't go wasted. But if we set aside 15 minutes in our day to sit and sacrifice our time to pray for that person, there's more like strength behind that prayer. Because it is a synergy. It's God's grace with our offering, our love that comes together to strengthen the prayer. And I remember St. Peteios saying that if you're having a problem with a child, you can pray for your child, but the best thing to do is to wake up at 3 a.m. and like commit yourself to 15 minutes or a half hour praying for that person. And because you made the sacrifice of sleep and getting up, interrupting your sleep, there's more power in that prayer. Another thing would be like to do prostrations with your prayer. So you're offering that extra effort of prostration. So you might say, oh, this person's sick or needs a lot of help, so I'm going to do 25 prostrations and Jesus prayers for them every day. You know, things like that.
Yeah.
So, and again, it's not a legalistic thing,
Right.
but it's a thing of, you know, the greater the sacrifice, the greater the love, right? So, you know, my daughter still talks about when she was like 4 years old, and she was like had a really bad stomach virus. She was throwing up, and she had to go to the ER. And I would sleep with her just to make sure she was okay during the night. And she remembers, she talks about it to this day. You know, she's 12. She said, "Daddy, you remember you slept with me? I hope she's not watching this tonight." So sorry about that. I always do that. I can't talk about my family too much. Sorry.
Following that
but-
default is privilege.
Yeah, I know. That's right. So I thought about it because she had the stomach bug this week, and I was like, oh no, it like brought back memories from like 10 years ago. So
Is she doing better?
yeah, thank God this time it was just like a 12-hour thing, and she recovered quickly.
Yeah.
So yeah. Yes, I hope you understand the difference between like a legalistic approach to this and it's an offering of love. And our love can be measured in a way to the degree of our sacrifice for that person. So, yeah, he goes on to share some pretty amazing stories here. When Father Maximus, as a young monk, this is on page 82, spent some time with Elder Pacious. And they were so you gotta like keep in mind, Elder Pacious was a hermit, so he didn't live in the large monastery with the other monks. He lived more isolated in a simple little hut by himself, and then visitors would go and see him. Once in a while, he'd have some of his disciples, his spiritual children, come and do an all-night vigil with him. So they were doing this all-night vigil. Father Maximus was reading the communion prayers, which are the prayers we read before Holy Communion, and then he started to sense something changing. Things changed so suddenly and dramatically that I could not figure out what was happening, Father Maximus said as he remained pensive. And then, so this is happening as they're reading the communion prayers. And then they were reading the part of the prayer that says, "Iperegia theotoke soson imas," which must be the canon that we read before Holy Communion, which means, "Holy Theotokos, save us." And as he was saying this prayer, that's when the room started to change. And he said, suddenly everything changed. Father Maximus repeated. He implied that extraordinary, wondrous phenomenon took place that he could not fully reveal. He did, however, go on to say that a very subtle wind rushed into the chapel, even though the door, as well as the window, were both firmly shut. The lamp in front of the icon of the Holy Virgin began swinging back and forth by itself. There was a lamp in front of each of the 5 icons. Only the one hanging in front of the Holy Virgin went on moving back and forth, back and forth. And Marquis says, "Were you afraid?" And Father Maximus replied, "To tell you the truth, I was neither afraid nor rejoiced. I simply witnessed those events like an outsider. I just turned with curiosity toward Elder Pacious, trying to figure out what was happening. He signaled to me to remain quiet as he knelt down and touched the floor with his forehead, remaining in that posture for some time. I stood there perplexed, holding the candle in my hand while the strange phenomena went on around me. After about a half an hour, and while the lamp in front of the icon of the Holy Virgin continued its back and forth motion, I resumed the reading of the service. And then he said, when I reached the seventh prayer of the blessing of Saint Simeon, the lamp gradually stopped swinging. So basically he says, afterwards he went on to say, what did you see? And then he says, what was that all about? He asked Elder Pacious. And Elder Pacious says, what? He replied, pretending not to have a clue what I was talking about. He said, that phenomenon in the chapel, what happened really? I asked, what did you see? He asked me again. I told him that I saw the lamp in front of the icon of the Holy Virgin swing back and forth, and describing everything else that took place. He asked me whether I saw anything else. I said no. And then the elder replied, oh, it was nothing. He said and waved his hand. Don't you know that in the holy mountain, the Panagia, the Holy Theotokos, goes from monastery to monastery, from cell to cell, to find out what we monks are up to. She just passed by here also. She saw two idiots praying and moved the lamp to let us know that she was paying us a visit. As he finished out his sentence, he burst out laughing. So basically, I mean, it was an appearance of the Panagia. Father Maximus probably didn't see it, but he felt the grace of her coming in. Elder Pacious wanted to be like, what did you see? He wasn't sure. So when he says he didn't see anything, he brushed it off. And then, he used his humor, which saints all do, she just saw two idiots here. And then he burst out laughing. So this is kind of how, have you guys heard the term a fool for Christ? So I wouldn't say St. Pacious was a fool for Christ, but he would act foolish many times to hide his virtue, to make sure people didn't think he was a saint. Because the greatest fear of a holy person is for people to think that they're saintly, so they want to hide that to the best of their ability. So they use that a lot.
I'm sorry, did you do that to make the people feel comfortable?
Mostly they do it to make sure that people don't think they're saints. Because they want to be thought of as being nothing, basically. They don't want to have a reputation that they're holy. So, it's betrayed by the grace of God. God reveals them as saints, and they do what they can to hide that fact. So they play the fool. They act like they're crazy sometimes.
So they're aware of their saintliness.
They're aware of the experiences, but they would never, ever think that they're saintly in any way. I think there's a point in this chapter where Father Maximus says even the thought that you're saintly is reveals delusion. So they literally are so focused on their own sins, they think there's no way I could be a saintly person. And perhaps when these experiences happen, they just feel unworthy. That's God's little gift to them to help encourage them in their ascetical struggle. But this seems to be pretty unique to the Orthodox saints. Their degree of humility, the degree they go to make sure they don't fall into delusion is really good for us to meditate on that. So Father Maximus goes on and talks about this a little bit. He says at one point when he was a student, they went to visit Elder Pacious in 1976. He said, we expected to find a frightful-looking hermit, an extraterrestrial being. Instead, we met a humble and simple-looking old man who cracked one joke after another, making everyone roar with laughter. At one point, he took off his shoes and started jumping up and down on his mattress like a clown. It was hilarious, at the same time quite disappointing. I started having doubts about whether he was, in fact, a saint. Most likely, I thought he was a half-crazed old man. So this kind of takes you into the actual experience, right, of what it would be like to meet a person like that. So people hear the stories of the miracles. They think, oh my goodness, I'm going to go meet a real saint. And then he starts jumping up and down on his bed, right? So it's oh, okay. So probably Elder Pacious knew that this group of theological students had this preconceived idea that he was a saintly man. That was probably revealed to him in his clairvoyance. So he probably acted extra crazy to make sure he extinguished that idea that they were saintly. He was a saintly man. But what's neat is that, having said that, Elder Pacious probably, most likely, had a natural sense of humor. He was probably a funny guy. Like if he lived in the world and wasn't a monk, he'd probably be like one of those guys that would just make people laugh, right? So that with a sense of humor that's crude and it just kind of puts other people down. And then other people generally have that sense of humor where it's just so funny and not at the expense of other people. And that's like a gift to have that, right? So,
Sounds like my father.
he's a funny guy.
Yeah. He puts me to shame.
It's really amazing to be funny. Like what a gift that is, right? I always try to be funny. It doesn't work. It's just like, some people have it now. The way they tell stories, the way they can pause and, some people just have it. It's like a gift. Yeah, some people have it.
But Verona's is
Yeah.
Boy,
Like George
George.
cracks me up. They're all pretty funny actually, but George is the most. So yeah, we all have gifts, and this goes to show how the sense of humor is a gift that God gives to us that can easily be corrupted. Most of the stand-up comics, these days it's like corrupted comedy, right? It's putting people down. So. So he goes on to say about personalities, which I like this because becoming a saint doesn't mean like you're like a cookie cutter, everyone's the same. And it shows that in the kingdom of heaven there's going to be all this diversity, all these different personalities, right? And he says, some of the holy people and saints are gregarious and lighthearted, like Pacious. Others are somber and introverted. I've known both types. The attainment of sainthood, you see, does not make everyone share identical personalities. I know of a spiritual father in our area who's got a really good sense of humor. And sometimes when I'm counseling people or hearing confessions of people who are extra sensitive, like I can't get through to them to correct them without hurting their feelings. So I send them to this spiritual father who's a lot stricter than I am, but he'll give them the same advice I gave them, and they think it's like the best advice in the world because he does it with humor. Like he knows how to like break the ice. Whereas like I'm a little more matter of fact, and I'll say this is what you got to do, and they might be offended by that, which is really how God can use the humor in a good way. So basically, actually Stephanos says this. They're trying to understand why someone would act like a fool for Christ. And he says, basically, he tried to obliterate your perception of him as a saint. And that's what they're trying to do. Have any of you ever read The Life of a Fool for Christ, or something that you enjoyed? There was like one that I read in seminary that I liked was Saint Simeon the Fool for Christ, and he lived in Constantinople in the 7th century, and he did some crazy things, but there was a purpose behind the craziness. Like he would fast without eating anything for the 40 days of Lent, and then on Holy Thursday he knew there was a lot of hypocritical fasting going on in the church, so he would go to the bakery and buy like all these cakes, non-fasting foods, would take it to the center of town to start gorging himself on Holy Thursday, which is like one of the strictest fasting days. And people were scandalized by this monk who was like eating everything. And because he had the gift of clairvoyance, he would say, oh, you're judging this sinful monk, but you were eating this at this time in your home. Like he called out people on how they were cheating when they were fasting in secret and judging people who weren't fasting. So he had that gift of doing that. He would always try to help prostitutes by giving them a break, by basically paying for them to spend the night with them. But then he would tell them to sleep in the bed, and he would go to the corner of the room and pray for their soul the whole night. And then he'd come out of the brothel, and people were like, look at this disgusting monk, like going in with prostitutes. So he did that for two reasons: to help the prostitute, but also to make sure people knew he wasn't holy. He liked the fact that they thought he was sleeping with prostitutes. He'd go to church. Like, this one's kind of silly. He'd go into the church, and he would like take these acorns in his pocket, and if he saw like old ladies like in the church that were gossiping during the service, he would just like throw acorns at their head. It's like,
Oh, he's not good at first.
you'd probably like him. You'd like him. And he would like, before services, he would like just eat beans, and then he'd go and pass gas in the service. And he would do this stuff, and people started like, because he would like heal sick people with his prayers. So after some time, his reputation would start to increase, and that's when he started doing these crazy things, because he did not want people thinking he was a saint. So Yeah, it's pretty interesting. So, there's another amazing story about Saint Euphemia. Saint Euphemia was a martyr who was tortured and died for her faith around the year 302. And she was tortured over a long period of time, like maybe like several days or weeks. I forget what it was. And there was a story in here. On a certain night, according to the story, this is page 84, Saint Euphemia, a martyr of early Christianity, knocked at the hermit's door, the door of Saint Pacious. It took some time before Elder Pacious was convinced that she was not the devil, masquerading as Saint Euphemia, but a real saint who materialized at his doorstep in the middle of the night. Saint Euphemia was also accompanied by the Holy Virgin and John the Evangelist. He hardly had a chance to open the door when all three of them passed through and joined him inside. Was he in some kind of an ecstatic state? I asked, giving Father Maximus an instant glance. I assumed that Elder Pacious was experiencing a vision, what transpersonal psychologists would have probably called an altered state of consciousness, an outcome of his ceaseless prayer and fasting. Father Maximus was emphatic that this was not the case. This was not a subjective experience that had taken place inside his elder's mind. Elder Pacious saw Saint Euphemia, John the Evangelist, and the Holy Virgin with his earthly eyes. They materialized in their physical bodies in a manner similar to that in which Jesus had materialized. And now this, I don't get this. He says, in the similar way that Jesus had materialized in his physical body when he appeared to Mary Magdalene and the apostles after the resurrection. The difference there is that Christ had his resurrected body, whereas the saints still don't have the resurrected bodies. So anyway, that's the author's mistake there. So Christ didn't have to materialize himself when he appeared to St. Mary Magdalene. He was risen bodily. So the saints, when they appear to someone, they do manifest themselves in a material way so they can see them with their physical eyes. But they don't have their physical bodies yet, as Christ received his physical body. That makes
It's like a hologram?
Either it's a hologram or they somehow, by the grace of God, bless you, make themselves visible to people. It's all through the grace of God. God allows it to happen, and that's what's happening with these appearances. So he goes on to say that the Virgin Mary walked in, St. John the Theologian walked through, and then he says, upon seeing her, the elder knelt down and kissed the Panilla's hands, while she stroked his head. Following the Holy Virgin was John the Evangelist. Elder Pacious knelt down once again and also kissed his hands. Without a word, the two walked toward the small chapel, while St. Euphemia stayed behind to have a conversation with the elder. And then it says, for 8 continuous hours they discussed all sorts of issues, some related to her personal life and theology. St. Pacious explained to me that listening to her describe her life was like watching a movie. Every episode of St. Euphemia's life paraded in front of his eyes in every minute detail. After he witnessed the torments that she went through, the elder sighed and wondered how it was possible for a young woman to withstand so much suffering. Her response was, Father, for the kingdom of heaven, that was nothing. Had I known at that time what awaited me in God, I would have tolerated infinitely more. That's a beautiful story with St. Euphemia, because she really did suffer a lot. And she was saying, like, after experiencing heaven, she wished she would have suffered more for Christ. So there's that direct correlation between suffering and purifying our souls to receive God's grace. And also that the fact that they met for 8 hours is pretty crazy, right? The backstory here was that Elder Pacious was having some kind of an argument or disagreement with the bishop in Thessaloniki, and this happens a lot in the church. A lot of times the bishops, the monastics, there's tension between the two, and this has been the case throughout church history. And I think it's a healthy tension. I think they keep each other, they keep balance in the church, which is needed. And because the saints help the bishops through their prayers, and the bishops obviously run the church for the saints to be sanctified. But sometimes one or the other prays, and they keep each other So they don't go into the details of what happened, but he said that Saint Euphemia gave him advice to help resolve the conflict he was having with the bishop. Saint Euphemia is also the saint in the which council? The Fourth Ecumenical Council of Chalcedon, which was about the Monophysite heresy. That's the one where the Orthodox teaching of Christ is one person with two natures, fully God, fully man. The Monophysite heresy taught that the divine nature swallows up the human nature, so monophysis is like only one nature. So they wrote down their theology in scrolls and put them at the breast of the relics of St. Euphemia, and then they closed her reliquary, and they prayed an all-night vigil, and I believe the next day or 3 days later, they opened the reliquary, and the Orthodox scroll was in her hand, and the heretical scroll was at her feet. And that's what helped the council decide what was Orthodox and what wasn't Orthodox. So St. Euphemia was the saint. So I guess she helps with resolving conflicts. It must be her. You can pray to her for that. At the bottom of page 85, he talks about diakrisis, or discernment. And this is something we all want to cultivate in our lives. Because, St. Pacious was really careful with these appearances of the saints, because he didn't know if they were like Satan trying to cause delusion and to confuse him. So discernment is something that we really need. What we said earlier about reputation, Father Maximus, the elder Pacious was troubled because he said, I'm supposed to be a hermit. I'm like going out into the wilderness by myself. But he says over 100 people come each day to visit me. He says I couldn't even do Vespers for a certain amount of time. I didn't even know what saint we were supposed to celebrate the next day. The whole situation was intolerable. Exhausted, old Pacious retreated to his hermitage, not knowing what to do, not knowing how to resolve this dilemma. Father Maximus, elder Pacious once said to Father Maximus, my greatest enemy is my reputation. Woe to the monk who becomes famous. He can never find peace of mind. So Elder Pacious went through this situation where he was really distraught at the number of people coming to visit him and how popular he was becoming. And he sat down with tears in his eyes. Suddenly, while in that state, he noticed a tall priest standing at the entrance of his cell. The stranger said, "Greetings, Father." Old Pacious was surprised and asked his unexpected visitor, "And who are you?" The stranger answered, "I am the martyr Saint Lucianos, and my name is commemorated by the church tomorrow. Because you don't remember which saint is celebrated tomorrow, I came in person to remind you. I was asked to instruct you not to lose heart. You must continue to offer your services to your fellow human beings in need. This is God's will." So, this is how things work. Not every saint's going to be the same. God called St. Pacious to this kind of life, and he sent other saints to communicate this to him. I think St. Lucianos is the saint who was one of the soldiers who repented. No, that's Longinos. I'm sorry. Lucianos is another saint. So yeah, that's a lot of wonderful stories here. There was a story Father Nick Pallas shared when they went to visit St. Elder Pacious. He went with a bunch of his friends from the seminary. And before they left, when they arrived to see the saint, they went to kiss his hand. He pulled his hand away, and he snuck in and kissed Father Nick's hand. But Father Nick was just a 22-year-old seminarian. So he thought it was really strange that this holy elder kissed his hand since he was a layperson. And then other people in the group, one guy, he greeted him, he didn't kiss his hand. And then another guy, he didn't just kiss his hand, he went into full prostration before him. So the guys were like, what does this mean? What is it going on here? And later someone explained to them that he had the gift of foreknowledge, so the seminarians who were going to become a priest, he kissed their hands. And the one who became a bishop, he did a full prostration, and that's what happened. The guy that he did prostration to was a bishop. And then the guy, he didn't kiss his hand or anything, he was just a theologian, he was never ordained in his life. So this is the kind of foreknowledge St. Pacious had. It's good to read his life. Let me see what else I wanted to talk about here. There was a situation when he was 15 years old where he was going to the woods on his own to pray a lot, and the family actually got worried about him isolating himself so much. So they had an older cousin visit the house, and they said, go talk to Pacious. I forget what his name was before he was ordained. Yanni, I think. And he's spending a little too much time, just try to talk a little sense into him. So the guy goes out there and he says, you don't really believe in Jesus Christ as God? He said he was a good teacher. He was a good moral person. We should respect his teachings, but obviously we don't have to worship him or pray to him. So young Pacious got really confused by this, and he said he lost all his hope and joy in his life. So he was really upset, struggling with these new thoughts that came in his mind. But he said, you know what? Jesus, even if he's not God, is such a good person. I'm going to worship him just because of how good he is. So he just went to the woods and started doing the Jesus prayer. And he said, Jesus, the risen Christ appeared to him. And this was his first appearance. And Christ gave him a lot of encouragement. So he used this story to show how positive thoughts are needed when we have these negative thoughts put into our mind. Just think positively, and God will reward that. And that's what happened with St. Pacious. The wild animals were really in tune with him. There's pretty amazing stories in here about how these bears came that looked pretty aggressive, and St. Pacious grabbed them by the ears and took them into the village, and he put them to work. He had them. They loaded the bears with some construction materials, and then he pulled them by the ears to where they had to go. Father Nick shares the story. I'm sure some of you heard the story where they were having a lunch with Elder Pacious outside. They were sitting on the ground, and the ants were going towards their food, and Elder Pacious saw that the others were distracted by the ants because they didn't want to get on their food, and Elder Pacious talks to the ants and says, what are you guys doing here? You turn around, leave the food alone. And the ants made a turn that way.
Wow. It was also in that Zoom call, I think, that Father Nick Palace shared about that. It was a lizard or a frog that confessed the Trinitarian theology of understanding of Christ and his relationship to the Father and the Holy Spirit to these three atheists. That's right. And they all became monks, I think.
He's trying to show what dummies they were. Even this lizard can confess the truth, and you guys can't. Yeah, it's just crazy. Yeah, snakes were a big thing in the life of St. Pacious. He had snakes that were his friends. One time a pilgrim went to visit with him, and the elder reprimanded him, what you did was terrible, and you should be ashamed of yourself. And the pilgrim was I've never met you before. What are you talking about? And he said, you killed my friend. And he's what do you mean, your friend? And he told him on the way here, on the path, a snake crossed you, and you killed him with a stick. And he was really upset about that. So he had the clairvoyance to know that his snake friend was killed by this pilgrim. Yes, it's interesting how, I think it's interesting, there's a lot of stories with snakes and saints being in communion with each other. I think that has a lot to do with how in Christ, the curse was undone, and how there's a restoration of communion between snakes and humanity in Christ. With the serpent in the Garden of Eden, especially with the Virgin Mary, the Panagia. There's the miracles in Euphemia every year, right? With the snakes that come out during the fast of the Dormition fast of the Virgin Mary. There's a church in Euphemia where these holy snakes come out every year from August 6th to August 15th, which is the Dormition of the Virgin Mary. And these snakes disappear after the feast day. They don't come back for another year. And they have little crosses on their heads, and they crawl onto the bishop's arm during the reading of the gospel. The people let the snakes crawl on them, and this is symbolic of the restoration of the communion between the serpents and people, especially in the person of the Virgin Mary, who's the new Eve. Through her obedience, Christ came into the world to reconcile the two. So that's pretty much it. Anyone else read anything in this chapter that, chapter 7, that they wanted to talk about? Pretty much chapter 7, it's a lot about spiritual warfare, and how the previous chapter talks about how saints and Christ himself appeared to the elder, but there's also visitations by the demons and the devil himself. it says here on page 99, a higher monk and a good friend of mine from Mount Athos, Father Maximus began, was attacked one night by a demon while he was praying. The demon grabbed him by the neck, trying to strangle him. They wrestled on the ground, and before he was able to disentangle himself, the demon struck him with his fist right here on his chest. Father Maximus pointed with a clenched fist at the center of his chest. And it wasn't just a spiritual blow, it was a physical blow. Like he was hurting the next day. And Elder Peteios called the person and said, you had a good fight last night. He said, but you need to get checked out by a doctor. You got some issue in your lung. So he had to go to the doctor. He had some issue that had to be repaired medically from this demon punching him in the lung. And the question is, why would this happen? Father Maximus said, I don't know. He was doing the Jesus prayer. And for some reason, God gave permission to this demon to punch this person in the chest. So it's not normal, but these kinds of things happen though too. There was a situation when I was a college student. I had a good friend of mine who, he was an Orthodox Christian, but he fell far from the church. He did something really wonderful. Like he came close to his faith again and helped convert someone that was really influential on the campus because he was a good at arguing with people. But he didn't do it with the right spirit. He did it more as a philosopher than as a Christian. But nonetheless, God worked through him, and this street preacher converted to Orthodoxy through this student. He was a sophomore at the time. But then he started getting resentful. He's like, this guy converted, and everyone's like talking about this, but no one's talking about the guy who converted him. That was the spirit of this young man. So with this resentfulness and, pride that built up in his heart, he stopped going to church. And he was not coming for 6 months, a year, and it was getting really bad. So, at some point I'm like, you got to come back to church. This isn't right, especially the circumstances of why you stopped coming. So he actually made an appointment to come back to church. He set up an appointment to have confession with the priest. And we all show up for Vespers that night, and the guy never shows up. So I call him afterwards, and I'm like, where were you? Father John's waiting for you. You're supposed to have confession. And he told me that the night before he had this vision of a demon that appeared over his bed and was putting a plastic bag over his face so he couldn't breathe. And he felt like it wasn't just a dream, it was happening. I couldn't breathe. I thought I was going to die. So he said, so why didn't you come to church? He said, well, I got scared and didn't come to church. I said, well, isn't that exactly what the demon would want for you to do, to get scared and not come? So he said, I guess you're right. So he scheduled his next confession a couple weeks later, and the same thing happened, and he didn't come to church again. So, yeah, it's just amazing how it's not common, but sometimes the demons will manifest themselves in these ways. And, the other way around, there's a story at the bottom of page 99 where old Pacious gave Satan such a strong punch in the face that he felt sorry for him. So Elder Pacious actually struck Satan and caused him a lot of pain. That day, Elder Pacious did not take Holy Communion, believe it or not, because he felt remorse for Satan, who moaned with pain after he was hit by old Pacious. Poor fellow, he said. So these are strange stories, but these are things that happen in places like on Mount Athos. So there's a lot of stories in the life of Elder Joseph the Hesychast. There's a funny story where this shows you that the demons aren't all-knowing. They're not like God, obviously. Elder Joseph the Hesychast, who's the spiritual father of Father Ephraim, he had some pilgrims some friends visit him in his cell. So he gave the one pilgrim his room, and he said, I'm doing an all-night vigil, so you can stay in my bed in my room. And he went to the chapel to do the all-night vigil. And he said, the elder decided to offer his own bed to his friend and the other room to the other pilgrim. He chose the outdoors for himself and planned to hold an agripnia, an all-night vigil. So while his friend slept on the bed, Elder Joseph spent all night long praying outside. Unfortunately, demons attacked the hermitage during the night and clobbered his friend. By morning, he was covered with bruises. When the elder returned and saw what had happened, he tried to calm his guest. "Don't be afraid," he told him. "That beating was intended for me, but the demons were confused and mistook you for me." So that was kind of crazy. Like, they beat up this guy thinking it was Saint Joseph. Shows you how dumb the demons are. But yeah, these are strange occurrences. And then there's stories of exorcism, which happen in the life of the church. We have in the priest's prayer book exorcism prayers. We're advised not to do them alone, but with a group of clergy if we ever do an exorcism. One time, I think I shared with this group, a lady came into the church who didn't look well, and she was Catholic, and it was after hours. I was a young priest and dumb. I let her into the church. I can't believe I did that. It was just me by myself in the church, and I was dumb. And so she just talking about her problems, demonic possession, and things like that. And I said, "Well, what church do you go to?" And she said, "The Catholic Church, this and that." I said, "Well, you need to go there, talk to your priest, and get taken care of." And she's like, "I tried. It's not helping. Nothing was working." I said, "The only thing I'm going to do for you, because you're not Orthodox, I'm not going to read Orthodox prayers for you. I'm going to anoint you with the myrrh of the Guardiotisa." I had it in my pocket. So I pulled out of my pocket the myrrh of the Panagia. I touched it to her forehead, and she literally like went back like 5 feet. And she said, "What was that?" And I told her what it was. And, she went up. I think she did a pilgrimage to Guardiotisa. I don't know if she got better, but you could see the power of the Panagia's myrrh, against whatever she was dealing with.
How do the exorcism prayers that you have differ from the ones that are done in baptism?
The ones at baptism, the ones we have in our prayer book are from St. John Chrysostom. The ones in the baptism prayer book are, I think, general exorcism prayers.
It is an exorcism model.
It is. It's an overall cleansing and casting out any demonic spirit that's there. The ones in the prayer book are similar in that they're showing Christ's authority over the demons and commanding those demons to come out. So I've never heard, though, to read the baptismal exorcism prayers for someone that's already been baptized. So I don't know what the reason for that is, but I guess the ones in the prayer book are intended for those who have already been baptized and allowed the spirits to come into their soul. So
I've heard that there's an understanding that even things as simple as the Jesus prayer or the sign of the cross in and of themselves are, in a sense, a simple exorcism. So is that true in the sense that it's it's inviting Christ into our life, which then pushes evil out? Or how would you make a distinction between that and a formal exorcism prayer?
yeah, it is true. That's why doing the sign of the cross is very important. It's like driving out any demonic energy and paving the way for Christ into our life. But sometimes more sustained prayer is needed to drive out a demon. And even if a demon is driven out, there's no guarantee that that demon won't come back. I think there's a story about that in this chapter where Father Maximus did the sign of a cross, or held his cross, drove out a demon that was, this lady that was in the church had never met Father Maximus before. But as he was praying, she started saying Maxi, kind of little Maximus, my little baby, it's taunting him. And he just kept praying. And then when the demon left, she was totally weakened, and she apologized. She said, "I had no recollection of what just happened." But someone asked him, "Was this lady healed because of that little prayer he did?" He said, "There's a greater likelihood that the demons will come back." And it reminds me of the verse where Christ says, if a demon's cast out, he'll go and find 7 more powerful demons and come and find the soul in order, but then do more damage when they come back. So it just takes a lot of effort, a lot of prayer, a lot of asceticism, the sacraments of the church to really heal a person who's demonically possessed. But yeah, the cross is a form of exorcism, right? Absolutely. So unlocking doors. Yeah, we can finish up some of the things in this chapter next week. and then from there we'll go into the temptations, which is chapter 9, invisible intruders, and this shows how the demons tempt people and how we resist those temptations. It's a pretty good. That's a good chapter, a good one for us to go over. So I'm going to turn off the live stream.